Well, now it looks like what we're seeing here on Fox, as I look at Fox News in the studio, they are now out in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, as we remember 22 years since the September 11th attacks. We are happy to welcome on and say hi to a friend of the show, former acting ICE director under President Trump. He started his career right here in Platte County, and that is Mark Morgan, who joins us on KCMO. And by the way, Mark was a special agent in the FBI at the time when the 9/11 attacks took place. Mark, great to have you back on as always. Take us through your memories 22 years later.
Yeah, just like always, Pete, right? I remember exactly where I was, exactly what I was doing. I was in Southern California. I was, as you said, I was a special agent with the FBI, working out of the Los Angeles field office. I just completed an early morning run, as I typically did back then, and I got a call from my supervisor. And she told me immediately turn on the TV, and I did, and I saw the Twin Towers engulfed in flames. And it wouldn't be long after, within a few days, I was back in D.C. I stood at the base of the Pentagon. A few days later, I found myself in ground zero for a few days. And then later, I would deploy as a special agent to Iraq.
So when you think back to that moment, I mean, you're in California, you're seeing this on TV from afar. Did it hit you at that moment that the world was about to change, or did it take time to settle in beyond the initial shock of the attacks?
No, I think I knew right away. I think every one of us, depending on what our kind of experiences were, what we were doing, I think kind of drove your initial response. But by then, I'd already, been in the FBI for, well over a decade. And I knew clearly this was a terrorist attack, and the first attack on our homeland to this degree, obviously since Pearl Harbor. And I knew that our world was going to change. I knew the FBI was going to be front and center.
And what role? I mean, when you look back on that time and your time in the FBI, what was the immediacy of that moment like in terms of figuring out what happened, who was involved, and then, of course, getting to the bottom of it? What were those weeks and months that followed like for the FBI?
Seismic shift. And I think you described it well, Pete, is that the world changed for all of us, including law enforcement, including the FBI, including our intelligence community. For the law enforcement community, specifically the FBI, we transformed from a basic law enforcement reactive approach to really, okay, after a crime has happened, we're going to figure out what happened. We shifted from that to being a preventative, proactive, threat-based, intelligence-driven organization and approach. It was a seismic shift. We went from, back in the day as an FBI agent, my worth, my evaluations were how many arrests I got, how many indictments I got, how many bad guys I put away. That changed the day on 9/11. Now we had to measure our success against, did we prevent the next terrorist attack, and that was the seismic shift.
And there's no way, I mean, I guess I'm sure there are ways of knowing what you've prevented, but there also is no tangible, in certain cases, I guess, right? No tangible way to know what you have prevented.
That's exactly right, Pete, and that's why it goes back, not to get too complicated, but it goes to the heart of output versus outcome. Output is easy to measure, right? Like I said, how many arrests, how many indictments, how many bad guys you put in jail. The outcome is really hard to measure when you're talking about a system now about prevention. To some degree, you'll never know what you prevented. And that was hard. That was hard not just for the FBI, but all organizations and the government to how do you measure our success when our success is about prevention. I think we're still struggling today to figure out how we measure that success. And unfortunately, I think also over the past 22 years, I think our countries have become complacent. And I think you don't have to look any further than the southwest border to show that.
Yeah, it's so true. Mark Morgan, he was President Trump's pick to run ICE during the administration. He began his career right here in Platte County. He's on KCMO. I mean, we look at the border, we look at 7 million people who have come across the border over the last nearly 3 years under this president. And, I think back to the 9/11 hijackers. Many of them faked passports to get into this country. Mark, why fake a passport when you can join 7 million people who are waltzing across the border? I mean, I hate to say it, but we don't know who these people are and what their intentions are when they've come to this country, and there's 7 million of them.
Pete, that's exactly right. I couldn't have said it better myself. And let's keep in mind, this is one of the things I think people have forgotten about. And part of it, there's a lot of people in this country that weren't even born when 9/11 happened, or they're too young to have any real memory of it. And I think that one thing, I think now if you ask a lot of people about the Department of Homeland Security, they wouldn't know much about it. The DHS was created. CBP, the organization that I ran in ICE, was created in the aftermath of 9/11. Its whole desire was to protect our homeland. Its whole mission intent was to help prevent the next terrorist attack from happening in this country. It's why DHS exists. And part of that was to secure our southern border. And as you said, in the last 32 months or so, we've had over 7.2 million encounters, and a great deal of them were released in the United States, and we don't know anything about them. We can basically run a warrant check in the United States, but we don't know about them in their country because they're not even showing up with documents. And then, Pete, the really scary thing is, in that same time period, the last 32 months or so under this administration, we've had 1.6 million known gotaways. 1.6 million illegal aliens have come to our southern border, avoided apprehension, and now they call the U.S. home from 170 different countries. This is a real issue on the national security threat. On the day we are remembering 9/11, the worst terrorist attacks in our life, right now we could have the next sleeper cell in our country planning the next terrorist attack, and we would have no idea because they have to look no farther than to exploit our southwest border.
How concerned are you that these organizations that you used to obviously play a major role in and help run, that they've been politicized to the point where they're not doing the kind of work that needs to be done to make sure that next sleeper cell is not actively operating somewhere here in the U.S. and, God forbid, planning some type of 9/11? I mean, how much do you lose sleep about that at night?
A lot. I mean, this is why I'm still in the fight. I think about this every single day, not just on the day that we'll remember 9/11, Pete. And I want to be very careful here because I do believe that there's a significant level of leadership in the FBI that are making horrible decisions. They're allowing themselves to be weaponized. I still, my 20 years in the FBI, I still know the majority of agents and analysts and support personnel get up every day doing the right things for the right reasons. Full stop. However, there is a bifurcation because what's happened on our border is become so politicized. And we've seen the director of the FBI in congressional testimony so hesitant. He wants to stay away from the border because he doesn't want to be connected to so-called immigration. But what's happened on our border is not about immigration. It's about illegal immigration, which pulls resources off the front line, relegated to administrative duties to process 7.2 million illegal aliens, and leaves the border unmanned, wide open, and allows cartels to gain control of our large areas of our border to exploit, to push those people across, criminals and potential national security threats. That's what the issue is about. So I'm concerned that because it's become so politicized, you have agencies like leadership, this is leadership in the FBI, being reluctant to really do what they need to do to really focus on the national security threat.
Mark Morgan, what are we not thinking about in the future of terrorism? I mean, 9/11 changed how we think of war and terrorism and everything else. Is there something that is going on in that space that we should be thinking about in terms of preventing whatever the next is on this front?
Yes. Intel. If we learned anything from 9/11, is that we had to increase our capacity to not only push our borders out, that our physical borders should be the last line of defense, not the first line of defense. And the way we push those borders out to prevent is to get better at collecting and sharing intelligence. And that's why I'm so concerned with the way we left Afghanistan, that we pulled all troops out, because what we did, I'm not saying we should have remained there in combat operations and nation building. That was a failure. But I think we should have left resources there to make sure we had an ability to collect intelligence. And we threw that out. I think we made ourselves more vulnerable. And the last thing I'll say is, make no mistake, the terrorist organizations that operate globally, their commitment and want to do us harm here at home and abroad still exists. We've created a vulnerability in Afghanistan as it's returned to a terrorist operating safe haven, and our borders remain a viable target for them to exploit.
He is Mark Morgan. He began his career right here in Platte County, went to UMKC Law, and worked his way up to being Donald Trump's pick to run Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, and he's continuing that fight today. Mark, it's great to have you on in Kansas City. Thanks for sharing your story and appreciate the time as always.
You bet, Pete. Anytime.
All right. Great job there by Mark Morgan. Good to have him on KCMO Talk Radio.